that is a song that is near and dear to my heart because we had it sung at our wedding. Oh. Every time I hear it,
Where are you?
gets me all choked up. So happy Thanksgiving.
It wasn't my fault.
Today we begin a series on the work of Brene Brown. Most particularly, we're going to start studying her book, The Gifts of can't even speak to it. The Gift of Imperfection. The Gifts of Imperfection. And the subtitle of it.
That worked out perfectly, though.
That worked out perfectly. Thank you, Janet. The Gift of Imperfection. Let go of who you are. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are. Yes. The Gifts of Imperfection. Brene Brown, just a little bit of background about her. Has anybody heard of Brene Brown? A few people probably have. Netflix. She has a show on Netflix. She's a research professor at the University of Houston, where she holds the Huffington Foundation Brene Brown Endowed Chair at the Graduate College of Social Work. She's the author of 5 #1 New York Times bestsellers, including The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, Braving the Wilderness, and her latest book is Dare to Lead. Brene Brown came to my attention when I watched a TED Talk by her. This TED Talk is now one of the 5 most watched TED Talks with over 25 million views. Amazing. She's also the first person to have a filmed talk on Netflix, which is called The Call to Courage, for those of you who are interested. And Brene Brown has spent her life studying vulnerability, courage, shame, and empathy. What happened with her is she started to look at why some people seem to go through tragedy and heartache and difficult times and fall, while others go through those similar experiences and somehow manage to come out the other side and thrive. Or if not always thrive, at least move forward. And so she wanted to understand what the differences were between these 2 groups of people, and discovered that one of the big things is this idea of self-worth, what she calls wholeheartedness. And she came in her first book, she came up with these 10 guideposts that she found was consistent in people who she describes as living a wholehearted life. And so for the next several weeks, we'll look at those guideposts, probably 2 or 3 times, 3 guideposts or so a week, but because I have this tendency to think I'm going to do things in 4 weeks and it takes 5, or 3 weeks and it takes 4, now I'm just saying for the next several weeks. So, we'll play though, because they're interesting. And this whole idea of just coming to this part of ourselves of believing that we are worthy of love, that we are worthy of belonging, is really what makes one group thrive while the other group continue to suffer in their pain. Here's what she says. Those who feel lovable, who love, and who experience belonging simply believe that they are worthy of love and belonging. They don't have better or easier lives lives. They don't have fewer struggles with addiction or depression, and they haven't survived fewer traumas or bankruptcies or divorces. But in the midst of all of these struggles, they have developed practices that enable them to hold on to belief that they are worthy of love, belonging, and even joy. And so what we're going to do in the next several weeks is look at some of these practices to see how we can cultivate them so that we can give ourselves courage, compassion, and connection. Then we share that with others. She says, and I quote, "It means cultivating courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. I am going to bed, it's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid. But that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging." How do we cultivate this belief in our worthiness? That's where we begin. And on this Thanksgiving Sunday, one of the highlights that Brene talks about is practicing joy and gratitude. Without exception, she says, every person I interviewed who described living a joyful life or who described themselves as joyful actively practiced gratitude and attributed their joyfulness to their gratitude practice. She says that happiness is connected to circumstance, but joy comes from that cultivating that spiritual intention every day. And that it doesn't happen by accident, that it does require our intention. And if that is true, then doesn't it make sense to some extent to see what it is that we do that stops us from experiencing and cultivating our gratitude and joy? How is it that we stop ourselves from living and experiencing life? She identifies two things. The first is the fear of loss, that something is too good to be true. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but where you're in a place of absolute awe. Maybe it's when you've held your baby for the first time, or you've got a puppy that's just loving you, or you see a gorgeous sunset and you get transported by the beauty of it. And isn't there a part of you that's afraid to just rest and revel in that? Isn't there a part of you that's like, oh my God, please don't let anything stop this. Don't let anything take this away. And in the process of our doing that, we're making that whole experience smaller because we're scared that it's going to go away. Now that's one. Her suggestion for that is to feel that vulnerability, to feel that fear, and then as much as we can to lean into the experience of joy anyway. To recognize that it's probably perfectly normal to have that feeling of, oh man, if I love it too much, it's going to be taken away. and to name that and then love it anyway. The other reason she identifies as a barrier to joy and gratitude is scarcity. And she identifies that in two ways. One is the need for something to be extraordinary before we're grateful for it, instead of finding gratitude in the ordinary moments. So, in her research, she spoke with people who had gone through enormous tragedy and asked them what it is that they were holding in their hearts with gratitude. And they spoke about normal, everyday events. Perhaps, little Johnny coming home and giving me a hug. Normal things, the little things, the making tea. Seeing Dad sitting on the couch, for me. And yet, we have this tendency to think that we have to wait for something to be an event before we give ourselves permission just to be there in that space of, wow, this is lovely. And so, if we can, just become mindful of the moment we're in and find the beauty in that. That will help to shift some of that resistance to the idea that it needs to be an extraordinary event before we give ourselves permission to enjoy it. The other is the idea the idea of not enoughness. For those of you who are familiar with that thing up on the screen, it's a turntable. And remember turntables when they played the record and they would get to a spot and they would scratch or something and they would stick there and they would stick there and it would be like a rut. And we would have to take some action, that is lifting the arm doohickey and move it over one and drop it back down, and then it would continue to play. Sometimes we're stuck in that rut. And that rut of, June Burnham calls it an organ recital, for example. It's like, well, this organ is hurting today, and next week it'll be this organ, and last week it was this organ. That's the song we sing. And some people sing it really, really well, and sometimes we see it with other people when they sing it, but we never see it when we sing it. But there are other songs that we play in our head. Not good enough. Not tall enough, not short enough, not able to sing well enough, not able to name anyone. Insert judgment here. And so because of that, we never get to that point of going, yes, this is great. And allowing people to see that. Instead, we have this resistance to saying yes. And instead, we focus on the scarcity, on things that we feel are not enough. She talks about her friend Lynn Twist, who has written the book, The Soul of Money. I've read that book. And in that book, Lynn Twist writes, and I quote, "For me and for many of us, our first waking thought of the day is, I didn't get enough sleep. The next one is, I don't have enough time. Whether true or not, that thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. We spend most of the hours and days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. We don't have enough exercise, we don't have enough work, we don't have enough profit, we don't have enough power, we don't have enough wilderness, we don't have enough weekend, we never have enough money. We're not thin enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, or fit enough, or educated, or successful enough, or rich enough, ever. Before we even sit up in bed, before our feet touch the floor, we're already inadequate, already behind, already losing, already lacking something. I can feel my energy dropping. And by the time we go to bed at night, our minds race with the litany of what we didn't get or didn't get done that day. We go to sleep burdened by those thoughts and wake up to the reverie of lack. What begins as a simple expression of the hurried life or even the challenged life grows into the great justification for the unfulfilled life. End quote. Thankfully. Instead, what Lynn Twist suggests and what Brene Brown identifies is enoughness. It's enough. When we do our best, it's enough. It doesn't need to be perfect. It's enough. And if we can get ourselves to start accepting enough rather than perfection, we can free ourselves to enjoy. And that is the gift of this picture of shifting ourselves out of the broken record that we say to each other often. Now, if it's any consolation, this idea has been with us for millennia. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount talks about this idea of worry and fretting that we do. And he says in Matthew 6, verse 25 through 34, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life?" No. In fact, we know that what will happen if we worry too much is we shorten our span of life, and in the meantime, we're having a crappy life anyway, because we're worrying. So this idea of just being where you are and accepting it as enough can be a really powerful instrument of transformation. Metaphysically, we want to look up. We want to look beyond where we are in our immediate circumstance and see the lack. And instead, we want to look up higher and see how it fits in. And we recognize that, yes, there are times when things aren't that pleasant, but normally it's not the allness of us. It's a part of what we're experiencing. And so, what if we were grateful for enough? is our goal. So, a couple of practices that we can do. It's not enough to say it. It's actually to do it. Brene Brown says, and I quote again, "For years I subscribed to the notion of an attitude of gratitude." We've all heard that. I've since learned that an attitude is an orientation or a way of thinking, and having an attitude doesn't always translate to a behavior. So, what does a gratitude practice look like? The folks I interviewed talked about keeping gratitude journals, doing gratitude meditations or prayers every day, creating gratitude art, and even stopping during their stressful, busy days to actually say these words out loud. I am grateful for. When the wholehearted talk about gratitude, there are a whole bunch of verbs involved. It seems that gratitude without practice may be a little like faith without works. It's not alive. And so here are 3 ideas for activating our gratitude practice. The first is written by a wise woman in our community. Her name is Gladys Sweetak. And she wrote this poem. Just say thank you. Giving is so easy. Why isn't receiving? Giving is God saying, I love you. Why isn't receiving the same? Giving is a pleasure. Why can't we receive in pleasure? Giving is a gift. Why can't we receive a gift with grace? Giving is so easy. Can we just say thank you? Giving is a blessing. Can we receive in blessing? Yes, we can. Thank you. The second idea is to keep a gratitude journal. Every day, write something that you are grateful for, either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day, or both. What it does is help to get ourselves reoriented and out of the rut of the same thing happening. A third is to write a letter of gratitude to someone. Let's see if I can find my notes about this. At the Greater Good Science Center at the University of California, Berkeley, published an article by 2 professors from the University of Indiana, in which they did a study with 300 people who were college students who were receiving counseling because they were feeling depressed. And they took a segment of this group and they received their counseling. And then the next group, they were asked to write a gratitude letter along with the counseling that they were receiving. And what they found was that those who wrote gratitude letters reported significantly better health, mental health, 4 weeks and 12 weeks, which is when they did the testing, after their writing exercise ended. This suggests that gratitude writing can be beneficial, not just for people who consider themselves healthy and well-adjusted, but also for those who struggle with mental health concerns. In fact, and I'm quoting, practicing gratitude on top of receiving counseling carries greater benefits than counseling alone, even when the practice is brief. The discoveries that these guys made included the fact that the people carried this emotional wellness with them, even if they never sent the letter. They take time, but they have lasting effects. Write a letter. You will find that it carries with you, too. And so I'm going to introduce this idea to you. You'll see all these jars here. They are my version of a joy jar. And somewhere on your papers, in your packages, you should have a couple of blank sheets of paper. And I'm going to invite you in a few moments to write down something that has happened to you in the last day, 365 days, doesn't matter, that brings you joy when you think about it. And what I invite you to do, once you've got that, we're going to play a video, and the music is going to be up and pumpy, and all is going to be fun. Invite you to come collect a jar and seed your joy jar with the beginning, I hope, of a gratitude practice. Take the jar home, and whenever something comes to you that you want to remember, that brings you that charge of joy, write a little note and put it into the jar. And then when that jar is full, or whenever you need a pick-me-up, you can go to that jar, and it's a good way to remind yourself of the blessings that we have. We live in an abundant universe, and most particularly in this country, we are so blessed. So I'm going to invite you to take a moment and think about someone or some event that you are grateful for. Something that when you remember it, it brings a smile to you. And write that down. We are blessed. And when you are ready, I'm going to play a video. It's several minutes long. So just whenever you're ready and feel comfortable, come on up the middle, grab a jar, put your note in it, and then go back to your seat. And this will just become our Thanksgiving ritual. I think it'll be a powerful way of saying thank you, of writing our own letters of appreciation, and of being mindful for the gifts that we have.
You're my life, you're my breath, you're a smile, you're my guest. You're the earth, you're the sun, you're the grass, you're a love. You're my hands, you're a bug, you're my eyes, you're a hug. You're the light in the dark, you're the spark, you are fun. You're my mom, you are water, you're the stars, you're my daughter. You're my friend to the end, you're my dreams, you're my father. You're the ants on the ground, the miracles that surround. I'm feeling it all around, the hemisphere. You're my pain, you're my sorrow, you're my hope, you're tomorrow. You're the strength when I'm following the path that I follow. You're the blessings that exist, the small things that bless, the gift to realize that all that I am, all that I see, all that I give, all that I'll ever be is a blessing. It's so amazing, and I'm grateful for it all.
Don't forget to put notes in it.